All right. We've now come to the legislative agenda. Will the clerk of the council please read the legislation for this evening?
Thank you, Mr. President. Starting with Ordinance 23035. It's on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember Thomas Stegmeyer and forwarded by City Council on March 7th. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to do all things necessary and proper to accomplish the purchase of parcel numbers 05534C14004, 05534C26004, 05534C26001, 05534C26003, 05534C26002, 05534C24001, 05534C27001 in the City of Wadsworth, and to declare an emergency.
Very good. At this time, Matthew Springer is going to explain this to us.
I was a little bit quick there.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Thank you. So thank you. We're kind of at the opportunity to now speak a little bit more publicly about a project that the city's been working on for quite a few months now. There was an article, I believe, earlier this week in the Medina Gazette that explained that the city does have a purchase agreement in place to purchase the Brickyard, which is a little over 200 acres on the south side of town. And so we were going to take a few moments to now that it's public, explain a little bit further about what this project entails. And then we brought this evening a few other individuals who have been helping us along this project. Jeremy Henty with OHM, as well as Jim Smith with Brownfield Restoration Group. So certainly as we go through this discussion, we'll turn it over to those individuals to speak about very specific items as far as this potential land acquisition goes. So again, as I mentioned, it's a little bit over 200 acres of industrial land on the south side of town. The city does have an executed purchase agreement which was signed on October 17th. The purchase price was $1.95 million. And so over the last 150 days, which was our due diligence period, we have been going through the process of doing as much research as possible to make sure we had all the answers and ultimately council could make a responsible decision. So we immediately applied for and received a targeted brownfield assessment grant from the Ohio EPA, which helped pay 100% of our Phase 1 environmental site assessment, as well as the Phase 2 environmental site assessment. The Phase 2 is coming to a near completion, and again, Mr. Smith with Brownfield Restoration Group would be able to speak to the initial findings of that report. Again, it's not 100% completed, but I think we are very encouraged based upon what we are receiving in that report. We did receive some site cleanup expenses. As you know, the Brickyard made bricks, and so there's a lot of aggregate on site, both from the brick itself as well as the concrete base that existed where the factory was previously. So we did work with a local company and received some cost estimates as to what it would take to go into that site and to begin crushing the material and to see if it could be recycled. So we did receive cost estimates to both haul it out and take it away, and then the second option was to crush it, leave it on site, and then use it at some point in the future, whether that's for road base, parking lot base, or other things of that nature. So I included on the screen just a few images for those who have not visited the property in the past. Again, over 200 acres. The Brickyard, when it was in operations, consumed roughly 70 acres of the site. So there's a lot of that land that was not used by the brick company when they were conducting business. In recent years, I don't think it's anybody's surprise, a lot of individuals use that site and frequent it. I know council had an opportunity to visit that site about 2 weeks ago, and we encountered a few dirt bikes. I think that's what they are. So there's a lot of individuals that are using that property, and again, we're encouraged and excited about the possibilities for the athletic complex. So as the article said earlier this week in the Medina Gazette, We are looking at this site to be the future athletic complex for the city. And so OHM had prepared a few different renditions to give you an idea as to what we envision for this site. On the screen before you shows obviously multiple baseball fields of different sizes, as well as an access road bringing you in off of Seville, various parking lots, trails, ultimately tennis courts, pickleball courts, playground equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a multi-phase approach, but certainly something that we think sets the community up for many generations to come. We're very excited about it. So at this point, I know there's probably a lot of questions from council about what are we finding on the site based upon our last site visit. It was obviously convenient that when we were on site, Jody Kaufman with Brownfield Restoration Group was on site taking soil samples and water samples. So if there are any questions, again, Mr. Smith with Brownfield Restoration Group is available to answer those to the best of his ability, as would Jeremy from OHM regarding the concepts that we've proposed thus far.
Questions?
I'm curious as to what the purity of the water in that pond, I mean, the old, where they got the clay pit, what the water's like in that clay pit. Because, you know, people are eventually going to use that probably for swimming or something, so, or boating, so I wonder what the quality is.
I think you'd be able to the best of your ability.
Yes.
Come on.
Yes. We need to record it, so if you could speak in the mic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Jim Smith, Brownfield Restoration. As Matt said, we are currently in the process of finishing up our assessment work, so we don't have all the answers that we will have, you know, in another couple of weeks. But we do have some information, and as a matter of fact, regarding the groundwater, just on my way out the door to come to this meeting, my colleague said, hey, we got some groundwater results from 5 of the 8 wells that we put in there. And I'm happy to report that the 5 wells that we have analytical for all came back very clean, meeting groundwater, drinking water standards, which is, you know, that's the first level of, you know, that's as good as you can get kind of thing. So far, groundwater looks very good.
Good.
Do you have what's the quality in the old clay pit?
Yeah, we have not tested the water in the pit. The water I'm talking about is from groundwater.
Right, I
monitoring.
realize that, but
Yeah.
are you going to test the water in the clay pit?
We can. It was not part of the scope,
Oh,
but
I'm surprised it wasn't, because it's a large area of water that's probably going to be used for recreation purposes if it's ever used for a
Right.
park.
right, assessments are a very iterative process. The first level of testing, soil and groundwater, would be typical. Now, the EPA, who is, you know, we're working for the EPA
Yeah.
on behalf of you folks. You know, that certainly can be expanded, you know, to check surface water, answer any other questions that come up based on the data that we do get. So again, it's an iterative process.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would certainly be something we'd be very interested in.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you can buy this without knowing that. I think it'd be, I mean, regardless of the outcome, I mean, we can always mitigate something. We've got to know it's there. So it'd be nice if I don't know how that, go ahead, Robert. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the pond, in initial planning phases, wasn't planned for swimming, but possibly fishing, or, you know, trails to be up around it more to look at, because it is a pretty feature
It is.
as you're out there when you're looking, and it has, the one side is hill and has the trees up on top, so, but it wasn't, you know, we didn't have any initial plans of swimming, of a swimming hole. That's something that could be, again, once we get into this with approval of council to move forward the purchase, then we'll begin the real detailed planning phase. And there's a lot of things that we'll have to flush out and see exactly what the community wants, what the needs are of the ball fields, and all those different things like we would do for any, for a new park of this magnitude. So, and we can look at the water quality to see what that is, if it would be conducive to swimming, for instance, and then that's something that we could work into plans, to design something of that nature.
I have a question, sir. How large, and I asked this question on site with your people, how large is the aquifer underneath? And as far as water volume, how large would that be?
I'm sorry, I'm not following the question.
There's an aquifer underneath that
Yes.
property. Do you know how large it is?
Oh, how large the aquifer is?
Yes, please.
Yeah, that's not really, again, part of the nature of the work that we're doing wouldn't be to, it's not a water resource kind of evaluation. It's whether or not it's contaminated. So I can't really answer that based on the work that we're doing in terms of like how large the aquifer is, what kind of groundwater resource it would be if you were, is that what you're getting at? Like how many gallons per minute could it
Not
yield?
really. I just, it's quite a large aquifer under there, I'm told, but I'd just like to know how large it is.
Is that knowable? I don't know if it is.
Yeah, well,
Should be on the map
again,
somewhere.
yeah, depending on exactly what you're really trying to get at in terms of how large is the aquifer. I mean, certainly the groundwater system under that side is very large. It's connected to all the properties all around it. There are groundwater resources maps that the Ohio Department of Natural Resources puts out. We can look at those maps and that would certainly, give you a general understanding of how large the aquifer is.
What might be helpful is, Jim, do you want to take a moment just to explain what is a Phase 2 environmental site assessment? What is the scope of your work? Based upon some of the initial soil samples that we've received back and you've shared with me, in some cases had elevated levels of arsenic. And I know that sounds incredibly scary for those who may not be familiar with what arsenic is, but talk maybe a little bit about the fact that it's a naturally occurring mineral or metal.
Yes.
And maybe what you're discovering on the site.
Yeah, and I think the first part of your, I will do that in the first part of your question too, maybe to address, what is a Phase 1 assessment and a Phase 2 assessment, which is the process that we're in right now. Especially given the nature of some of the questions, that's probably a good place to start. So a Phase 1 environmental assessment and Phase 2 environmental assessment focuses in on what occurred at the property, in this case, the brickyard. Industrial operations that may have impacted the environmental quality of that property. So Phase 1 is all, it's also sometimes called desktop study. Phase 1s are just research, the historical record, a site inspection, a walk around, but no sampling. The demarcation between Phase 1 and Phase 2 is when you actually get out there and start sampling. So Phase 1 is done, we are in the process of Phase 2. The sampling that we're doing, as I've described a little bit, soil and groundwater is where you would start with that sampling. We're just getting results in as we speak, literally, as I mentioned. Again, and thank you, Matt, for asking for that clarification. So the work that we're doing isn't necessarily, it wouldn't address the question, which is a very good question about, the groundwater resource, how big is the aquifer? We are focused very, very much so on the prior industrial use of that property and how that activity may have impacted the soil and groundwater quality. Okay, so now, having said that, now to the other part of Matt's question, what are we finding? I mentioned the groundwater so far, 5 out of 8 wells, all meets drinking water standard, very good. A little bit surprising, actually, surprising on the upside, given the industrial nature of the site. The soil, so far, the only thing that we've found in the soil that exceeds a standard is arsenic, as Matt mentioned. But that needs explanation as well. There are different standards for different property uses under the EPA's, we're working under the Voluntary Action Program, which is the program in this state for repurposing brownfield properties. The arsenic that is exceeded at this site, it exceeds a residential standard, which is the most stringent standard that there is. There are also commercial industrial land use standards. And this was an industrial site, so the highest arsenic level that we found at the site was, I believe, 51 parts per million. That's just a unit of measurement. Whereas the standard for commercial industrial is 100. We are 1/2 of what the allowable standard is for a commercial industrial site. Now, residential standard, and I have to, my cheat sheet for residential is 14. So yes, we exceed a residential standard, but you know, you need to keep that in perspective. For example, background, Mother Nature puts, you know, in Summit and Stark County, 15, 16 parts per million. Mother Nature deposited arsenic levels at, you know, at that level. And so, and it's understandable, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, the residential standard's 14 and you can have naturally occurring levels that are actually higher than that? Yes. It's confusing, but that's just how stringent the
But
standard is.
Then do I understand this is actually 3 times that level for
The
residential?
highest level would be, yeah, 51, so about 3 times.
Yeah.
So it's true, the industrial activity at the Brickyard has impacted the soil with respect to arsenic, but I don't want that to sound like super scary. You know, there are ways to deal with it. It's not that uncommon. Frankly, I'm surprised that the contamination that we found to date isn't higher.
What ways? Legal is one thing or whatever. Now, this or, you know, EPA standards, with this, and of course, we would probably want this to meet residential levels, but what would this site be considered? I mean, obviously, it's not industrial, but if we use it as a park, would it fall under the residential standards, or is there a area in between?
Yes. So if you used it for a park, and if you wanted to get the Ohio EPA's, their blessing, you know, which frankly, you know, you do not have to do, but if you want to, it's under the Voluntary Action Program. If you took the site through that program, that's where all these levels would apply. So there's nothing illegal, frankly, about using that property for residential purposes right now. But if you want the Ohio EPA's blessing to use it for residential purposes, the standard would be what I said. So now here's something else to consider. We are focused, as I said, on the industrial footprint of that property. There's, how many acres? 200 acres, of which the industrial piece is, I don't know, 15, 16, maybe? I don't recall.
It's probably about a 50-acre area.
The industrial footprint. And the intensity of that activity, the industrial activity, is much smaller than 50 acres even. So my point being that even under the Voluntary Action Program, if you wanted to take this property through that program, you could do that. You could carve off the industrial footprint of that site and keep that an commercial industrial standard and use it for an industrial park, or do whatever you want with it. the bulk of, many acres right now already meets residential standards.
Could you point on that map, maybe Matt, or, because you've been out there more, where the worst case is, the 15 acres maybe, sir, that you're talking about? I've just made that number up, but where's that?
So if you look at this,
Yeah.
as you look into,
Yeah.
on this rendition, you would be traveling south off of Seville Road into the site. The majority of the industrial area, you actually see the two silos that are still standing.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So the majority of the area that we're talking about is in this vicinity here.
Where's St. Ed's?
St. Ed's would be due east, which would be off of the screen, somewhere over in this vicinity here.
Got it. Oh, it's quite a ways from them. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Just trying to get acclimated.
Did I answer your question?
You did. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
there was a lot of other questions that council members had. I want to make sure that we address those.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
The first question was why weren't we made aware of the possible purchase of discussions. We were not made aware of this until 4 or 5 weeks ago. We actually did have a discussion and presentation back on October 18th of 2022. That was the day after we signed the purchase agreement. That's our process. After a purchase agreement is signed and it's secured, then we start discussions, and we've always done that for every property. We had presentations of this property, talked about the price, talked about the potential uses of a park, showed some maps and some diagrams and those things. Then we had discussions on February 7th, for March 7th. Those are all in executive session, as you know, and in here again tonight. The next question was, why are we only proposing 2 full-size fields and 2 reduced-size fields? Would it not make more sense to build 4 full-size fields and movable fencing so more teams could play at any given time? And I'm going to turn that over to the expert in that area, Jeremy Hinte.
Hi, everybody. It's good seeing you. It's been a couple weeks. I was out on site with the mayor of a different community this afternoon, so I'm a little dressed down. But to answer this question, it really has to do with the participation level in youth sports. So I personally got to work with all of the youth sports in the Parks Master Plan project pretty hand-in-handly. And they did a really great job of describing how participation works. So they say, imagine a funnel. So the younger kids at the top, you have higher participation, and as the kids get older, the funnel gets a lot smaller, so they drop out of the sports. So by the time they get to grade school, intermediate school, and high school, they're starting to switch over into high school sports, and that's really when we need the full-size fields. So working with the group, they only have 1 full-size field now that they're actually using. That would meet their need. 2 would just be a bonus. So we feel, just to be frugal, it wouldn't make sense to put 4 full-size fields out there just because it's triple the cost. It's about triple the size of a standard field. So it's really expensive to do that. And for the amount of play we want to get, it makes more sense to have the smaller fields just because that funnel's bigger than what it would be if we looked at it at the bottom. Does that answer your question?
Okay. The next question from Mr. Copley was, what is the plan for secondary ingress-egress? I feel that discussions should be had with St. Ed's in regards to possible easement before moving forward to the purchase. We did talk with St. Edward's as being the neighbor next door, and we've had continuing discussions through the years on potential use for the property. They've told us that they're willing to sit down and have those discussions about potential second egress when we get to that point, when the planning becomes more in-depth and we know exactly what we're going to be doing. And then hopefully by that point, they'll have additional idea for what their plans are for the rest of the property. But it was positive that they're willing to sit down and have those discussions. So we appreciate that. And the last question from Mr. Copley was, I feel the end of March closing date is a little premature without the final Phase 2 environmental survey completed, especially after being advised of the arsenic levels consultants were finding. Will this be something harmful to children? I guess I'd turn it back to Mr. Smith to maybe address that again or wrap that question up a little bit more. I'm sorry, do you want to repeat it?
I'm sorry, again,
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure I followed the question.
Yeah, with the March closing date, is that too premature without the final Phase 2 environmental survey completed, especially after being advised of the arsenic levels? And then will that be something that will be harmful to children?
Well, as far,
Yeah, please.
And just to let you know, we have per agreement, our closing date is March 30th, next week.
right, yeah. Well, I wouldn't presume to, understand what everybody's individual risk tolerance is, but I'll, from my own perspective, try to answer, the question if I were sitting in your shoes. First of all, if we had more time, obviously, the more time we have, the more data and results that we can get you. How much more we'll have, probably we may have the other 3 groundwater samples, for example, by tomorrow, results. So every day we're getting a little more information, and we're feeding that to Matt, as soon as we get it. Now, if I were in your shoes, would I feel comfortable closing on a site based on what you know about it now? Again, everybody's risk tolerance would be different. That's a personal thing. I can tell you, again, that I am surprised at how, I'll say, clean the site is. I expected higher levels of contamination. We were looking at several areas of the site that had underground storage tanks that had fuel in it, and we were testing for fuel components. We're finding little traces well below even residential standards. Again, based on the information that we have, a surprisingly clean site. Is it pristine? No. Almost no brownfields are pristine. The fact that so far the only thing above standard that we found is arsenic that meets commercial industrial but doesn't quite meet residential is, it's amazing, frankly. If I were in your shoes and had to make a choice based on what you know now, it sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Now, having said, I don't know what the purchase price is. I'm not commenting on that. But in terms of, oh my God, are we rolling the dice and possibly acquiring a Superfund site? No. Might we still find some contamination? Sure, that's the way these things go. It can be the last sample that we take that you find, oh shoot, this is above a standard. That's just the way the process goes. Based on what we've seen so far, the trend is, wow, this is a reasonably clean site. Does that get at what you were asking?
Yeah. I think, a good point you made there too was this is a former industrial site. This is a brownfield site. And so, with those, there is cleanup needed, there is contamination. The good thing is that on the favorable side, this is a brownfield site now, but the plans are to make it something beautiful, to clean it up, to restore it to what it was once before, with the athletic complex, to make it a community gathering spot, and then with all the recreation areas in the southern end, really taking a brownfield site and making it something good for the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's and those are the success stories. We love working on sites that can actually take something that was a blight, a brownfield, as you were saying, and not just clean it up so now it's, but also then turn it into something for the community that, you've gone from blight to blessing.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Arlington, good question on financing. From what sources will the funds come from for pay for the property? We had talked about that last fall in October, and we do have money budgeted for the purchase of this property in the budget that we have right now, and we talked about that. We also have a donation from Mr. Fixler that we plan to utilize as well, that money for this property.
I'm sorry. I've got a kind of a follow-up from somebody else who couldn't
sure.
be here tonight. Here we go. Okay, so basically, the property's $2 million. Where do we find the other roughly 4.5 million? Where's that coming from? Do we know that yet? Or cart before the horse here? Help me with that.
Yeah, it's a good question. That was down on the, how do we fund the improvements?
Okay, well, you can wait. It's fine.
No, it's a good question. Please, this is a great forum, I think, for questions. We appreciate giving the questions ahead of time, so we had some time to think about it. But if there's other come up, I think this is fantastic, especially with the purchase of this amount. We had, in that projection that I showed in October, for the next 5 years, using the general fund surplus that we have for all the projects and improvements that we've talked about. You know, we did fire station, we're planning on purchase of this property, we have some other purchases that we've talked about, and then improvements to parks. We had planned, in that preliminary projections, was $1 million to go towards the improvements. And that was, on my diagram, was, I think, next year or the year after. So the remaining money, we would look for grant funding, which I think we could probably do pretty good at getting some grant funding for this. We could look at borrowing either internally or externally for something like this. But then, you know, as things progress, and maybe we'll have more additional surplus to be able to put towards this, as well as if the income tax continue to increases that they have been. Another question?
Sure. I mean, go ahead and finish yours. You've got,
No.
are you done?
Yeah, the other question was funds for meeting the property. Mr. Springer had mentioned that, you know, around $450,000 to have someone come in and crush that material,
Sure.
a little bit more to remove it. We would plan at this point on utilizing that material at the site. It's very similar to what we do for the other concrete that the Street Department, Parks Department, Water Department takes up throughout the community as they're doing water repairs or doing street repairs. We have a facility that those are dumped at and stored. We create a pretty large pile, and then every couple of years we have a company come in and we pay to have that crushed. It's put into different materials, 1s and 2s, 304, 57s, and then that material is utilized in our construction. So it serves two good purposes. Number one is we're recycling that material. It's just not going to a landfill somewhere. And number two, it's more cost effective. I think the last time we looked at it was about half the price of buying new materials. So I look at that as a benefit that we have that material right there. It could be crushed up, it could be reused for the parking lots, for the roadway, so all of that.
Yeah, Robert, let me just add one thing when we're talking about the funding sources, because I think it's critical what Jim had mentioned. Right now, we're operating as though we're going through the EPA's Voluntary Action Program. And by doing that, it opens up potential funding sources in the future as far as grants for additional cleanup. So that's kind of how we've been pursuing this all along, so we give ourselves that opportunity in the future.
Next question was, why are we purchasing more land than needed for the Phase 1 and possibly Phase 2 developments? You know, I think that, number one, this purchase comes all or nothing. It comes with the whole 205 acres. We see that as a benefit because of the price per acre, but also we're you know, the site for the athletic complex is roughly around 70 acres, 60, 70 acres. So in essence, we're getting 130, 140 acres of what we think could be a really dramatic impact to the community and even the region of having a park of that magnitude, of that size, with the potential hiking trails, potential mountain biking trails and facilities, the ponds that are there for fishing, maybe some fields. There's some unique terrain there. Could be for trail running and those types of things. Could be for bridle trails. Could be recreation off-roading trails. So that's the other part of this property that we haven't really talked about. That there's a great possibility to have a really premier park. Next question was the pond is a serious hazard due to the steep banks. The plan for development needs to include projections for that. I'll have Jeremy weigh in on this. I would say that, you know, there is steep sides on the one side of the park, but a lot of parks have those areas that have the steep elevations, and you know, I would envision some type of, if we had a trail or something right up next to that, we could have fencing or something like that installed if it was needed.
Yeah, you're kind of stealing my thunder, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, you know, we observed the site. It's very, very steep back there. I think that's an instance where we would mitigate that in the design and prevent people from getting to that point. So any unsafe areas slope-wise on the site, we would have to protect and make sure that, you know, we're keeping the health, safety, and welfare of the public in mind from a design standpoint. Pretty common. I'm actively doing a site for a quarry that has an 80-foot cliff that we got to keep people away from. So this is just design elements that we get into when we're turning these type of spaces into recreation.
I personally like that difference in elevation, 30, 40 feet on that one. I think it'd be the south east corner, because when you're standing up on top of there, it is just a magnificent view of the pond, and then you can see over the silos and kind of into the valley to the airport. So I think there's some nice natural features with that. Should the Medina County Parks District get involved in purchase? And that's a possibility, and that's an option we have. We know that the Park District was interested in this property in the past, and we've had conversations with them, and I know they've had conversations with the current owner, and nothing transpired, but we have reached out to them and told them that if this does come to fruition and we are able to get the approval to purchase it, then we'll sit down with them and see if there's any interest there. And then I think we would need to make the decision at some point is, do we want to develop that natural area, or is it something we would want to have the Park District come in and help out with?
Yeah, I would think that they're better at it than we are. But that's what they do. And it seems sooner than later, I'd love to see us partner with them, so we literally buy half, they buy half. So I don't know how involved, I mean, are you having monthly, daily, weekly conversations, or it's just?
With them?
Yeah.
Well, we haven't really had many conversations with them
Yeah.
about it now, because we don't know, you know. Once we get firm approval, then we can start having those conversations with them.
I would think you'd get them, I would have those conversations before. But,
Well, I know the individual's out this week that we would have those conversations with, so, you know, we can start next week if you would like.
yeah, why not? It'd be kind of nice to see if it'd be really help with, because we won't be able to financially, I would think it'd be quite some time before we could get to that piece of it. So it'd be nice to have them offload that burden, if you will.
And those are discussions we'd have to have. What would
Yeah.
the benefit of, we've, you know, relinquished Holmesburg Park to the Medina County
Yeah.
Park District.
Yeah.
They have some great plans, and part of the master plan is going to show the plans and the improvements that they wish to make, and I think everyone's going to be happy to see what those are. I think they're going to be benefits to the community. They do they are experts at the passive recreation
Yeah,
in that
they're
type of
pretty good
area,
at that,
so I agree with that. The question on the maintenance of the developed area will be extensive and costly. How would this be funded? Good question. Typically, that would be funded through the Parks Department, like our other parks and fields are. Although there could be agreements in the future with some of the leagues that could have some maintenance responsibilities or take some maintenance over on those fields, similar to like Mall, for instance, for soccer, Fieldcrest for football. We haven't done anything that with baseball to this point, but that's something we could do. There will be some cost savings, and Jeremy has mentioned on how consolidating fields from taking fields from 4 different areas and parks and putting them in one, there'd be some cost savings. I ran some rough calculations of maybe 3 hours a week that it would save in that time frame to be just at one area. But we would have to talk about if additional staffing would be needed at some point as this would be developed. You know, similar to what we did when we brought on the Interurban Trail in the Tri-Line Park. We added another staff member a couple years ago, although we did remove the Holmesbrook maintenance last year, so you know that may help out as well. But great question. I love when we're thinking about things in the future and not just focus on it right now. Next question, should any of the purchase be delayed until the completion of environmental study? I think that was just covered, unless there's any other questions about that. And then there was some comments on arsenic. Is there any more questions on arsenic?
Not till we get the
Reports
report.
in the phase two.
Okay. And then Mr. Yurcheck had a couple comments or questions on if we would acquire the land and it takes a few years to develop and then raise the funds needed to accomplish the goal, is having the city owning the park with no immediate action a good thing or bad thing? And I would turn back over to Jeremy on that to get his perspective.
I'll keep this one brief. So Mike, who came in earlier and spoke about this manor, we see it as a very good thing because the current master plan is recommending an athletic complex. The previous master plan from 10, 15 years ago is recommending an athletic complex. Talking to the baseball guys, this is the furthest this discussion has ever gone. So it's showing progress. You know, we see it as if you purchase the property, you're showing progress and commitment to the community that we're going to follow through with what we're learning coming out of all this public engagement.
Maybe it's you, I don't know. So we buy the land for a little south of $2 million. What's it cost to do that? Your best guess. You've done this before. Throw a dart. We won't hold you to it.
So for the
I can't, if it's up there, I can't read it. It might have said.
It's not up there.
'Cause
So
you're-
we looked at cost estimating the Phase 1 area.
Yeah.
And if my memory serves, it was somewhere between 5 and 6 million. And that's contingent on, do we reuse that recycled material on site or not?
Sure.
So we know there's savings with using it on site. We can also use that material on site for fill if needed, because obviously there's a lot of earthwork. Like I mentioned last time, we located the facilities in the flatter area to minimize the extents of development. So, you know, I think one question came up, why did you look at it in this area, not south of the pond? If we looked at it south of the pond, there would be a whole lot of earthwork to happen, and it would be probably several $1 million more. So that's all we have from a cost estimate standpoint.
Sure.
Right now.
I really like the plan. Yeah, it's nice.
I would just add on that, you know, we have done land banking in the past, and that's essentially what this would be. But I think we have some good thoughts on some, you know, immediate uses and needs coming up, and would want to move forward with that planning process. So I don't think it would sit idle too long if everyone.
Yeah. So what's it cost to, I mean, if Tom Stugner bought this and put this all in because he wanted to, what would it cost him a year? I mean, remember Steiner Youth Center, what was that, $700,000 I think it cost us a year? Made that
To
up. but
operate it. You're talking about
to
operating
operate, yeah.
costs?
So what are operating costs, do you think, for this?
Yeah.
Somebody's got to have figured that out, because we can't get here without that number, right?
Well, it would, so that would depend on what amenities are put in. So, you know, this,
there.
yeah, this image here shows things that may not ultimately go there.
No, I understand that, but if this is the goal, we ought to have a number, right? I mean, it would seem, I mean, it's not, I'm not asking for it tonight.
Yeah.
We got time.
Well, so we don't have a maintenance cost for that. Again, it's so
Right.
variable based on, you know, if we're looking at this and all those amenities were built as far as the, you know, the courts and the concession stands and
Yeah, so-
the rental facility and all that, you know, I don't know how we'd be able to come up with that.
Yeah, I
Oh, you
think
can
one
come
thing
up with
is it's
that.
a little bit different in that, like a Steiner Youth Center, you had a staff that maintained, you had an outdoor pool, you had a exercise area, you had classes, that sort of thing. But versus like a Memorial Park or a Durling Park, where you have, definitely there is organized uses, but often those are done by organized sports entities.
Right.
So for example, like WASA, they, you know, utilized the fields, and then I believe when they did the concessions, they provided their own concessions. I don't believe that we had any involvement with that. So you wouldn't necessarily have an employee to do that, if that's your question.
Yeah, we have,
Typically, the concessions are, you know, ran by the sports leagues. It's
I
a
really didn't need
fundraising.
concessions so much, but guess what? We're going to need somebody to mow these yards. and
So that's what we
somebody-
do
That's a lot of-
already
That's a
presently.
lot of,
Yeah, that's what we presently do on all the multiple parks.
yeah.
Yeah, we
I'm
could
just
look
saying,
at.
what's the burden rate of this?
Yeah, no, and again, that goes back to the.
If you don't
the
have it, you don't have it. That's
Last
no
question about the
problem.
maintenance. We'll have to look at the, mobile areas of that, in relation to Holmesbrook, or mobile areas, and, what's that relation to what we gave up last year? And would we be able to take care of it with our current staff, or would we have to be adding staff? But, there's so many other variables on if we use a synthetic turf, or, the ball fields, or the leagues, had some maintenance there or not. It'd be really hard to pin down, but we could put,
Sure. Okay.
we
I
could
just-
try to put something together.
Sooner or later, Kathy Fix is going to ask us for a number. That's what I know.
Well, that would be future years, budgeting for
I
the
know.
Parks Department.
But it'd be nice to, any project you do, yeah.
In the initial phase, of course, like in this photo here, the light area, that was going to be for future ball diamonds, not initially.
Right.
So maintenance-wise, again, nickel diming and kind of take a look at everything initially wise, would that be more of a like a natural grass type area that would not have to be taken care of maintenance-wise, like they're doing out at Holmesbrook Park, something like that? Or would that be, it would still just be maintained as a grass field, you just wouldn't have the ball diamonds there?
You're talking about the future areas in white? so
Right,
what
right.
would happen
And
to those?
initially, if you never put those diamonds in, that would be a mowed area the whole time, or would it be aesthetically done somewhere else to where the maintenance was lower on it?
It would probably be more of a native meadow where you only have to mow it once, maybe twice a year, just so trees don't start coming in. Otherwise, yeah, you're not going to want to focus energy on that large of a space.
There's also, I'll say that part of that area is now wooded, that we could leave wooded. We wouldn't need to take the trees down. Part of that area in the white is actually fields right now, farm fields. We could leave those as farm fields, or plant some type of no-mow type area. Looking at that, and it's a good question. I'll have to take that and do some schematics on, like Holmesbrook, for instance. What's the difference in, mowing, for instance? And it may be very similar to that. Obviously you have trash. Would be, some extra time to take the trash out from there.
Plow those.
Restrooms are cleaned we have a contractor that does that. We don't clean those ourselves. So those would be probably the heaviest cost, but some of those might not be cost because we may do them with current staff. So.
Very good. Tom Stugmeyer, we talked about something earlier today. I no longer remember what it is.
We were just playing Monopoly with everybody else's money, land or whatever. We were looking at,
Move forward, we can't hear
because I had, if you follow the there's the rail line
Oh, that
down
was
through
it.
there. We were
Okay.
talking about the rail line.
Yeah.
And even some of the rail areas that are in there, once you excavate them up, the potential way down the road, and because all rail lines are connected, it's somewhere way in the future, whether that could be some type of a connecting line to the Cuyahoga Railroad or something like that, because all the especially trains that they bring in there do come from all of the other sites. I mean, the steam train they bring in comes in from Indiana, and you can always get from here to there, but it's, and so we were just looking way down the road. I mean, there's those possibilities for that as well, if you didn't use it for industrial purposes. So just
Yeah, no, I thought that was a really neat idea.
playing with somebody
Yeah.
else's money, but
That's what we do here. It's their money. We appreciate it. Yes, Bruce?
I had one more thought or another thought.
Yeah.
And that's, when we acquire this property, and most of it's wilderness, and they're riding four-wheelers and trail bikes and all that out there.
Yeah.
Now we acquire the liability for that.
Sure.
So I'm
I
wondering what
wondered that, too.
liability we really assume by owning the property.
That's why we have Tom Morris.
That is,
It is
that's a
hot
great,
spot for those
that's a,
four-wheelers.
that's a great segue to the final question that we had prepared. So, and Mr. Yurchuk had that. Mr. Morris, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. One, we have insurance that covers most of our property, but as long as we maintain a system with the Wadsworth Police Department investigating, we create a no trespass zone. The liability issues are only if we were to create a situation which is actively trying to hurt people out there. We'd have a trespass signs up there, no trespass signs up there, and then the Wadsworth PD with some additional monitoring I'm very comfortable with the liability issue based on that.
Okay. No further thoughts yet?
I do.
Okay, David.
Point of order,
Sorry, yeah.
Mr. President, and this is in regard to executive session and what was discussed now that this is public.
Yeah.
Maybe what we discussed as far as a use, can we talk about that now that it's public information?
What's in executive means that nobody was allowed to be in there when we had those discussions. They were exempt from the Sunshine Law. We are out of executive session, so if you want to discuss matters that are no longer protected by that, you certainly have an opportunity
So
to.
something that was discussed in one of those meetings I could talk about legally?
I'm not sure what you're going to say, so I hazard, but I don't see a problem, envision a problem right now.
Okay, well, thank you. And it just goes back to I believe it's the original meeting. We annexed this in to the city from the township. It was petitioned by the property owner, who's still the property owner, to be an industrial complex. He is not a developer. Admittedly, he's a property flipper. He sold some of the out parcels that were, frontage on other roads. And originally, this was brought to council as a combination industrial parkland, which I felt was a nice thing. We have something you won't find in northern Ohio, which is a rail line right next to it. There's, for some use, that water that's underneath may be beneficial to a type of industry coming in. And we've taken away the original intent of that property when it was annexed in. And I just feel, I don't think that's right. I still, the combination.
Sure. I don't see that as a bait and switch, though. I really don't. I think it's you just have to feel your way through to the highest purpose, and it may be this, not that. Now that we've seen it, now that we've got our hands on it and around it a bit, I'm not disagreeing with you because you're bigger than me. But
True.
I just think that, yeah, go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, that's a good discussion that we had, and it is currently zoned industrial, and that was the purpose when it was brought in, I think, 12 years ago. And, I would say in our conversations through the years with the current owner, we worked hard, they worked hard to get an industrial user in this site.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the rail access. And they've had interest, they've had LOIs in the past, is what we've been told, but nothing ever panned out. About 4 years ago, the city got very engaged. We went to some site selectors and we put presentations together, really pled a case for this site and for Wadsworth, why Wadsworth is a place that all these companies would want to be, and nothing panned out. So, after that, I think the owner had looked at some other possibilities. He offers for residential and those types of things. And then I think came to the conclusion, like we did, is, at what point does that parcel remain vacant? Or is there a use for it? And so as we started talking more about the need for the community as a whole, and the mayor were discussing that, we do have a need for parklands. We do have a need for additional ball fields for athletic complex, like Mr. Hinty said, that's been talked about for a long time. And then on the cusp of, knowing that the master plan was being developed, and that was another one of those key points, it became pretty evident that, if we're going to find a facility like that, where would that be? And looking at the footprints in the city, there's not large acres of land. Those acres of land are very expensive, more than this property for a smaller amount of land, if you can even find one. And so it really changed the perspective of that. And once we started talking more and more, and even the owner realized that, the community does need a place for children to gather. There's even a greater need now. There's a greater need for athletics in the community as the community has grown. A lot of our facilities weren't meant for games to be played every night, multiple times a week, all weekend. They were maybe built for a game every couple nights, one game, and now they have 2 or 3 games back to back, and so just really outgrown. But that's not uncommon for a community that has grown and seen the population increase we have in the last 20, 30 years. So this is well needed, and so we came to the conclusion that this is a great location for that. And so that was the proposal that we put together, and that's why we had proposed this to be purchased and negotiated with the owner to do this. And he's supportive of of this use of this. So it can be that community space for everyone to come and for many, many generations to get usage out of it.
Okay. We're missing a couple people tonight, and all we can really do is move it to, actually, put it on first.
Well, this was the first reading, so, tonight, and I would
Okay.
move it to it. I make a well, you need to
Tammy
read it
hasn't
first,
read it.
Tammy, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Ordinance number 23035 on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember Thomas Stegmeyer. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to do all things necessary and proper to accomplish the purchase of a parcel number 05534C 14004, 05534C 26004, 05534C 26001, 05534C 26003, 05534 26002, 05534C 24001, 05534C 27001 in the city of Wadsworth and to declare an emergency.
Mr. President, I make a motion to place ordinance number 23-035 on second reading.
Where's it first?
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-035 is placed on second reading.
Ordinance 23036 on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember David Williams and forwarded by Public Ways Committee. An ordinance levying special assessments for improving the Phase 2 southwest parking lot with concrete pavement, interlocking pavers, landscaping, storm sewer, private sidewalks, decking, steps, parking areas, driveways, patios, ADA accessible ramps, downspouts, and landscaping, grading, sidewalk curbing, repairs to the Phase 1 southwest parking lot, and other surface improvements in the city of Wadsworth and declaring an emergency.
Gene.
David, too.
No, I know, but I gave it to Gene.
Oh, that's right.
Mr. President, I'd like to move ordinance number 23036 to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Ordinance number 23-036 is placed on second reading.
Ordinance 23037 on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember Ralph Copley, forwarded by Public Safety Committee. An ordinance authorizing and directing the Director of Public Safety to enter into a contract with Southeast Security Corporation for the installation of an access control system at the new fire station and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I'd like to move ordinance number 23-037 to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-037 is placed on second reading.
Ordinance 23038 on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember Ralph Copley, forwarded by Public Safety. An ordinance authorizing and directing the Director of Public Safety to enter into a contract with McComas Landscaping, Inc. for the construction of a permanent safety town village and 911 memorial and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I'd like to move ordinance number 23-038 to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-038 is placed on second reading.
Ordinance number 23039 on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember Ralph Copley, forwarded by Public Safety Committee. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety to take all necessary steps to secure and accept a grant award from the Ohio Office of Criminal Justice Services, OCJS, in accordance with the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, subgrant award to the Wadsworth Police Department and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I'd like to move ordinance number 23-039 to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-039 is placed on second reading.
Ordinance 23040 on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember Ralph Copley, forwarded by Public Safety. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Safety to donate 3 Motorola MCC 5500 dispatch consoles, 3 Motorola MCC 5500 console audio box 2s, and the associated console system cabling and accessories to the Bath Police Department, and to declare an emergency.
Mr. President, I'd like to move ordinance number 23-040 to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-040 is placed on second reading.
Ordinance 23041 on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember Bruce Darlington, forwarded by Public Service Committee. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to purchase a new wireless portable lift system from Mohawk Lifts LLC through participation in a Sourcewell contract and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I'd like to place ordinance number 23-041 on second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-041 is placed on second
At
reading.
this point, to stay in order, we have a couple new ordinances on first reading. They were on an addendum to the agenda. We have ordinance 23042 on first reading, sponsored by President Council Bob Thurber, discussed in Committee of the Whole, an ordinance to make a supplemental appropriation of $571,000 in the 471 Street Improvement Fund for purposes other than personal services for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2023, and to declare an emergency.
Mr. President, I'd like to move ordinance number 23-042 to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-042 is placed on second reading.
Ordinance 23043 on first reading, sponsored by President Council Bob Thurber and discussed also in Committee of the Whole this evening. An ordinance to authorize the drawing of a warrant in amount not to exceed $13,858.09 for the payment of the amount due upon a contract with Medina County Emergency Management Agency and to declare an emergency.
Mr. President, I'd like to move ordinance number 23-043 to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-043 is placed on second reading.
And back to the regular agenda with resolution number 2303 on page 2. It's on first reading and sponsored by Councilmember Thomas Stugmeyer, forwarded by Economic Development Planning Committee. A resolution to accept the recommendations of the Tax Incentive Review Council for the 2023 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I move to place resolution number 23-03 on second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-03 is placed on second reading.
Resolution 2304 on first reading, sponsored by Councilmember Thomas Stugmeyer, discussed by Economic Development and Planning Committee. A resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Wadsworth to enter into an agreement with the Township of Wadsworth, Ohio pursuant to RC Section 709.192 for the purpose of entering an annexation agreement and modifying the payment provisions of RC 709.19 related to annexation of Medina County, Ohio parcel number 038-17C-26036 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I make a motion to move resolution number 23-04 to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Resolution number 23-04 is placed on second reading.
Ordinance 23031 is on second reading, and there will be a public hearing on this matter on April 18th. It's sponsored by Councilmember Thomas Stugmeyer, discussed in Economic Development Planning, and also approved by the Planning Commission. An ordinance to repeal existing sections 154-365 through 154-368 and to enact new sections 154-365 through 154-373 of the codified ordinance of the City of Wadsworth, repeal the existing High Street Arterial District and establishing the High Street Transitional Business Overlay District.
Mr. President, I make a motion to place ordinance number 23-031 on third reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-031 is placed on third reading.
Ordinance 23032 on second reading, sponsored by President Council Bob Thurber, discussed in Committee of the Whole. An ordinance to amend Section 3436 of the codified ordinance of the City of Wadsworth to provide for the allocation of income tax receipts during fiscal year 2023 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I'd like to move ordinance number 23-032 to third reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Ordinance number 23-032 is placed on third reading.
Next is ordinance number 23016 on third reading, sponsored by Councilmember Bruce Darlington and forwarded by Public Service Committee, an ordinance to approve the execution of a schedule with American Municipal Power, Inc. for participation in the Community Energy Savings Smart Thermostat Program and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I move to call the question on ordinance number 23-016.
Hearing no, geez, we moved. Hearing no objection to Mr. Darlington's proposed to call the question, will the clerk take a roll call vote on ordinance number 23-021?
Actually, 16.
16, oh yeah, I'm one ahead. 16.
Thank you. Stugmeyer?
Yes.
Hines?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Copley?
Yes.
Darlington?
Yes.
Ordinance number 23-016 has been adopted.
Next is ordinance 23021 on third reading, sponsored by Councilmember David Williams, forwarded by Public Ways. An ordinance authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to advertise for, receive bids, and enter into a contract for the 2023 street striping project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I call the question on ordinance number 23-021.
Hearing no objection to Mr. Williams' proposed to call the question, will the clerk please take a roll call vote on the adoption of ordinance number 23-025?
Hines?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Copley?
Yes.
Darlington?
Yes.
And Stugmeyer?
Yes.
Ordinance number 23-025 has been adopted.
Well, that's 41.
23-021.
Yeah.
Did I say 25? 21, sorry.
Ordinance number 23025 on third reading, sponsored by Councilmember David Williams and forwarded by Public Ways. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to apply for and enter into grant agreements with the Ohio Department of Transportation Division of Aviation for the purchase of snow removal carrier vehicle and attachments for design services for precision approach path indicators, PAPI, design services for airport parking apron, design and construction of obstruction removal, and design of an automated weather observation system, AWOS, at the Wadsworth Municipal Airport and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I call the question on ordinance number 23-025.
Hearing no objection to Mr. Williams' proposed to call the question, will the clerk please take a roll call vote on the adoption of ordinance number 23-025?
Williams?
Yes.
Copley?
Yes.
Darlington?
Yes.
Stugmeyer?
Yes.
And Hines?
Yes.
Ordinance number 23-025 has been adopted.
And lastly, we have ordinance number 23026 on third reading. It's sponsored by Councilmember David Williams, forwarded by Public Ways. An ordinance authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to advertise for, receive bids, and enter into a contract for the airport taxiway and fuel farm concrete pavement repair project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, I call the question on ordinance number 23-026.
Hearing no objection to Mr. Williams' proposed to call the question, will the clerk please take a roll call vote on the adoption of ordinance number 23-026?
Copley?
Yes.
Darlington?
Yes.
Stugmeyer?
Yes.
Hines?
Yes.
And Williams?
Yes.
Ordinance number 23-026 has been adopted. That ends the legislation for this evening. Originally, we talked about having an executive session. However, I'd like to call an audible. Since we can't do anything really about it, we're missing two people. Mr. Patrick, will you go home disappointed? Come on, man.
That may be nothing new sometimes, but that's okay. We can talk about it at the next meeting.
Okay. I appreciate your grace and your mercy. Thank you. If there is no other, any thoughts, City Council? If not, I'll entertain a motion to
moved.
adjourn.
Second.
Adjourn. You're ready, Hunter?
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.